You know, we all tend to think of science as this ultimate source of objective, provable fact, right? But what if I told you that the entire scientific enterprise is actually built on a foundation of ideas that science itself can't prove? Today, we're going to dig into the philosophical bedrock that science is standing on. It's fascinating stuff.
So I want to start with this quote. It's something a student apparently overheard in a physics class, and it really captures a feeling a lot of us have. Science can prove everything. It just sounds right, doesn't it? I mean, it's the engine of progress, our best tool for figuring out what's true. But is it really that simple? Let's poke at that idea a little bit. Does science really operate in some kind of pure vacuum of facts? Or does it, like pretty much everything else humans do, rely on a set of fundamental beliefs, assumptions that can't be put under its own microscope?
To get to the bottom of that, we first have to get our heads around the idea that science isn't just a thing that happens. It's done by people. And those people are looking at the world through what you could call unseen lenses. In the academic world, these are called research paradigms.
A research paradigm is basically a researcher's whole worldview. It's not a specific theory, but it's the philosophical framework that's running behind the theory. Honestly, the best way to think about it is like an operating system that's always on in the background, shaping every single question they ask and every conclusion they come to. So every one of these paradigms, these worldviews, is built on three really big questions. First up is ontology. This is the big one. What is reality? Is it a single objective thing out there, or is it subjective? Second is epistemology, which asks, okay, how do we even know things? And third, you've got axiology, which tackles the role our own values play in all of this. These are the fundamental questions that guide a scientist, whether they're thinking about it or not.
And look, these questions are not just for philosophers sitting around in tweed jackets. The answers a scientist has, even subconsciously, dramatically change how they do their job. So let's look at two competing paradigms to see what I mean. This table really cuts right to the heart of the debate. On one side, you've got positivism. This view says there's one single objective reality just waiting for us to discover it, through measurement and experiments. But on the other side, you have constructivism. This suggests that reality is actually subjective and that knowledge is something we all create together through our shared experiences. These are two totally different ways of looking at the very same world.
So here's the bottom line, the fundamental disagreement. Is a physicist discovering a pre-existing law of the universe that was always there? Or is a sociologist co-creating an understanding of a social dynamic with the very people they're studying? The answer you give depends entirely on which paradigm you're starting from.
And that is why this all matters so much. This deep-down belief, this completely unprovable assumption about what reality even is, it dictates the entire scientific process, from the very first hypothesis all the way to the final paper. Okay, so let's move beyond those big, abstract philosophical frameworks. Science also relies on some really practical, but still unprovable, tools to help guide its thinking. And one of the most famous of these is the principle of simplicity. I'm sure you've heard of Occam's razor. It's this simple but powerful idea that when you've got two competing explanations for the same thing, the simpler one is probably the better one. They call it a razor because it's all about shaving away all the extra messy, complicated assumptions you don't really need. And hey, this isn't some new idea. Isaac Newton was saying basically the same thing centuries ago. It's a heuristic, a rule of thumb, that's just deeply baked into scientific thinking. But here's the catch. It's a preference. It's a guiding principle. It is not a law of nature that we can prove. We just sort of assume the universe likes to keep things simple. And the crazy thing is, it works surprisingly well. In fact, it was right at the heart of one of the absolute biggest scientific revolutions in all of history.
So for centuries, we all believed in the geocentric model, right? Earth at the center of everything. But to make that model actually match what we saw in the night sky, astronomers had to keep adding all these ridiculously complex patches and fixes, things called epicycles and deferents. It was a mess. Then along came the heliocentric model, with the sun at the center, and it just worked. It explained everything we were seeing, but with way less complexity. That's Occam's razor in action. The simpler theory won.
All right, so let's tie all of this together. We've talked about these giant philosophical frameworks and these super useful guiding principles. So what are the core, unprovable beliefs that modern science is really built on? Well, here they are. Science has to start by assuming an objective reality even exists. Otherwise, what would there be to study?
It has to assume that the laws of physics are the same here as they are on the other side of the universe, or experiments would be totally meaningless. It has to believe in cause and effect to make any predictions. As we just saw, it trusts that simplicity is a pretty good guide. And maybe the deepest one of all, it operates on the value judgment that just pursuing truth is, by itself, a good thing. That's an ethical belief, not a scientific fact.
And all this leads us to a really crucial idea from the philosopher Karl Popper. He argued that the real goal of a scientific theory isn't to be proven true, because, absolute proof is often impossible. Instead, a really good theory has to be falsifiable. It needs to make a bold prediction that could, at least in principle, be tested and proven wrong. That's where its real strength comes from.
So let's go all the way back to that student in the physics class. Maybe they had it just a little bit backward. Science's incredible power doesn't come from being free of beliefs or assumptions. It comes from having an incredibly powerful, coherent, and self-correcting system of beliefs that lets us explore the world in a really rigorous and amazing way.
And that, of course, leaves us with a much bigger, much deeper question. If science itself is this magnificent tool built on a foundation of belief, then how do we, as individuals and a society, ultimately decide what's true?